Now, our speakers today, we have two people, Brandon Huber and Jason Lattier. Brandon is a native of Pennsylvania near Philadelphia, and he became interested in plants by visiting the Philadelphia Flower Show. And he began exhibiting plants there at the age of 15 and began winning awards. He received a BS degree from Temple University in horticulture, an MS degree at NC State, and he's currently working on a Ph.D. environmental horticulture at NC State. He hopes to become a college professor and do teaching and research. Our other speaker today is Jason Lattier. Jason is a Raleigh native and received his BS and MS degrees at NC State in plant breeding and genetics and a PhD at Oregon State University, also in plant breeding. Jason has had or worked at internships at Longwood, Kew, Wisley, and also the Eden Project in Cornwall, and also at the Cloud Forest in Costa Rica, working at the nonprofit Nectandra Institute. Jason is now the director of the Caine Conservatory at High Point University. Both Brandon and Jason have had a diverse interest in plants over their short lives, especially in aroids, which include, as you know, Arisaemas, Arums, and Amorphophallus, among others. Their lecture today is about how they became interested in aroids, and they're meeting Alan Galloway, who lives south of Raleigh near Plant Delights Nursery, and who died last May of bone cancer. Alan had a 30-year career in information technology at North Carolina State University and retired in 2018 as the Director of Information Technology Services at the university. Alan was a world authority on aroids, discovering at least 30 new species of plants, mostly in Southeast Asia. And since his death, many of his plants are still being cataloged and identified, and it's likely that many new species will also be named from his collections. As Alan's health declined over the past couple of years, he began giving away his vast collection of plants to various people around the world in order that they may be conserved after his death. Brandon and Jason will talk about their background and tell us about aroid plants and how they came to know Alan and the collection of plants that they got from him. So let's give a virtual welcome to Brandon and Jason.
Well, thank you guys for having us. It's really a treat for both Brandon and I to be here today. I'm just going to give a little bit of an introduction to the talk before handing it over to to Brandon Huber, which I just met and became friends with last year, and we've had a lot of fun interactions together. And I'm really happy to be doing this talk with him. Just to give you a little bit of a roadmap on what we're talking about today. I guess I could start off with what this talk is not going to be. It's not going to be a botanical treatise on Amorphophallus. It's not even going to be a full biography of Alan Galloway. There's people in this audience who would be much more qualified to give those talks. But today we just kind of want to tell a story about, you know, the allure of this genus, how we got interested in it and our first contacts with it, and about the ability of this plant group to kind of bring people together. And then we're also going to talk about our early meetings with Alan Galloway and some of the work we did with him in the last year of his life. You know, he was very kind in sharing a lot of his knowledge and plant material with a couple of up and coming horticulture professionals. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'm also going to talk about some of the work we're doing at High Point to display and also help preserve some of his collection in the years to come. The way this will work is Brandon actually has a really deep background with Amorphophallus, as you'll see here in a minute. So for the first half of the talk, he's going to give a little bit about his background and kind of a little bit of a botanical primer on the group. And then the last half of the talk, we'll talk about our meetings with Alan and then some of the work we're doing at High Point University. So with that, I am going to kick it over to Brandon to talk about his first contact with the group and some of the work he's been doing with it since he was a young lad. So take it away, Brandon.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having us today here. So I started, as you heard, I started my horticulture. I was born and raised in Philadelphia, and you might wonder how somebody in Philadelphia, you know, acquires an interest in horticulture. Well, it may be rare, but not impossible. But I credit my early interest in horticulture to annual visits to the Philadelphia Flower Show with my parents. It was the bizarre plants in the horticourt that really caught my eye and attention. I especially enjoyed checking out the vendors at the show. And this was my first encounter with an Amorphophallus. So you have these bizarre plants sold in the sections, and I got my first hand on Amorphophallus corm, which at that time I never imagined the madness that it would become. That summer, as the petiole grew and began to emerge, I was intrigued at how alien-like it was, followed by this tropical-like foliage with very symmetrical leaflet patterns. About 2 years later, I had my first bloom, an interesting hobby for someone at 14 years old, but my love for plants continued to grow from there. Around the same time, I acquired two other relatives, the Staramatum venosum and a Drencunculus vulgaris, which I planted in my parents' yard in Philadelphia, both hardy to the zone 6B. During the same time, I began to compete in the Philadelphia Flower Show. Though I had a lot other plant entries, I quickly became known for entering an Amorphophallus conjac, which I forced each year to align with the timeline of the flower show, late February, early March. Many had a love-hate relationship for this plant because it took away the nice smell of the hyacinths that frequented the show exhibits. It was even shown on the front cover of the local magazine in Philadelphia, a local newspaper. Each year, to bloom on time, I had to figure out how to force it and time it exactly right for the flower show. Here you can see the Amorphophallus conjac exhibited among other plants, which none of these are similar in any way. So it would compete against the large wisteria trees of some of the longtime exhibitors because it was too large for the bulk category, and it didn't fit in any other category. So it joined a bunch of other plants, which it really stuck out. It's another look at it. If timed correctly, it would stink the whole way to and from the flower show in my small car. Even though it might be 20 degrees outside, I might have to crack the window to allow some ventilation. It was too tall to transport potted up, so I routinely potted it at the Philadelphia Flower Show on the morning before the first exhibiting day. I couldn't imagine if you were pulled over with this plant smelling like a dead body in a car. From about 2010 onward, others began to follow in exhibiting these Amorphophallus conjac after they learned that they were bizarre and they were pretty relatively easy to force for the show. So in 2015, there was actually a class registered in the genus Amorphophallus. It was not a surprise that I would continue my journey through a career in horticulture. I also started working at the PHS Meadowbrook Farm among plant nerds just like myself. And at the time, I was attending Temple Ambler in horticulture as I worked at PHS Meadowbrook Farm. But I wanted to grow an even bigger Amorphophallus, the Amorphophallus titanum. And working at the greenhouse, I knew I could grow just that in the right environment. So on a trip to the Huntington Botanical Garden, my boss connected me to the director, the Huntington, and I got a special tour with him, and I asked him if I could purchase a Amorphophallus titanum. And to his surprise, he said, "Hold on a second, I'll be right back." He comes back with this corm shown here on the left. And he says, "You can take this back in your luggage, it's yours." So I grew it on in the greenhouse for a couple years until I would then go on to grad school at NCSU. So here in fall 2014, me about to transport it to its new home in Raleigh, North Carolina. And it quickly grew in the years following in 2015. And then 2016, to our surprise, it surprised us with a flower. I always have to thank Diane Mays, the greenhouse curator at NCSU, because I wasn't even a student yet, and I asked her if I could house this large plant in the greenhouse. She probably thought I was a crazy person just trying to house all my house plants in their greenhouse. But after hearing it was a titanum, she was delighted to have it. and since they didn't have one there in the collection. In 2016, it amazed us with the flower and drew a crowd of roughly 5,000 visitors to our greenhouse. It's amazing how one plant can bring so many people together. As thousands come to see a flower from all walks of life, we can share, in the joy of this blooming event. Some of our attendees, the first time it bloomed was Alan Galloway, and then later Jason Lattier. So I'm going to pass this back on to Jason.
So my first contact with Amorphophallus came in 2009. I had just finished up a stint in the cloud forest of Costa Rica, working there for about half a year with orchids and some other cloud forest tropicals. And I was lucky enough to land a fellowship with the Garden Club of America and the Royal Horticulture Society to work in the UK for a year. And one of my rotations was here at the world's largest conservatories at the Eden Project in Cornwall in the UK. And I was one of the first students to keep a little travel blog. I put it up there. It's painfully out of date now, but there's a lot of good pictures of all the gardens and the travels that I did there. So within these geodesic domes was a full rainforest collection of plants, as well as a full Mediterranean garden. And here's just a little peek inside of the rainforest collection. So I spent a lot of time working in this collection, and it actually was not within this collection that I saw my first Amorphophallus, but like many great conservatories, the offsite greenhouse where a lot of the rare and interesting material is kept was where I ran into my first Amorphophallus. So this was Amorphophallus titanum, and I was in there working just as an intern, doing a lot of watering, weeding, cleaning, that sort of thing. And this plant just stood out amongst the rest. And I'd never seen anything like it. I mean, it was so huge, and the petiole was as wide around as my hand. And I was just completely dumbfounded with this plant right away. And I think that's kind of the effect of Amorphophallus when you see them for the first time. It's just a group of plants that you never forget. And if you're lucky enough to also have a stinky flower nearby, you can never forget that smell as well. So they had also had a konjac in bloom right beside those titanums that day as well. So I was lucky enough to smell like this mesmerizing putrid odor that it made. And I never forgot this plant group from my internship days, and I always wanted a chance to work with them. But these plants can get to like 20 feet tall, just one leaf. So I didn't figure I'd ever have an opportunity to do that. And with that, I'm gonna kick it back to Brandon to talk about what makes this group of plants so special and so alluring to plant geeks like us.
So many might ask why one would grow an Amorphophallus, considering it smells so bad. So one of the biggest reasons is that it's a flagship conservatory species. It's a must-have for almost every conservatory. Guests from all walks of life know about this plant and just can't wait to smell it. They'll drive hours to see it and line up just to get a quick glance at it. It's the world's largest inflorescence. It can noted at as tall as 10 foot 2 inches. And the corms on these, the tubers on these are humongous. They can weigh as much as 339 pounds, which was the largest ever recorded. Here's a quick little time lapse showing lupin in action in 2016. As it opens and then starts to fade. And here's an example of lupin itself, how large these tubers can really get. Though it's not 300 pounds, lupin's tuber weighed 121 pounds right before its 2019 flower with a 24-inch wide diameter. One truly fascinating things about Amorphophallus and their relatives is they can do the thing called they're thermogenic, meaning that they release heat as a pollinator mechanism. You can see that not only do they draw lots of flies and swarm of flies from the smell, shown here is Drunkunculus vulgaris on the left, but also they're actually releasing heat as much as 15 degrees, as shown here by this thermal image of lupin in 2016. The petioles of Amorphophallus are also fascinating. A single leaf atop a petiole with symmetrical leaflets. Amorphophallus have these leaflets, which are quite variable in size depending on the species. You can see here how large the titanium petioles can get. The largest petiole being Amorphophallus titanum. As the leaf emerges, they're protected by a sheath with this fascinating lichen mimicry to prevent damage of emerging petioles in the wild. Most Amorphophallus follow a pretty interesting life cycle. Many years of foliage before a flower can occur, as much as 7 to 10 years for titanum. The leaf replaces itself every 12 to 24 months for titanum until it builds up enough energy to flower, typically around 30 pounds of a corm. After flowering, it will return to a leaf cycle for another leaf or two before reblooming again. During dormancy, everything above ground goes away. Everything goes dormant, which always shocks people when you look at this giant plant that looks like a tree, and you can't imagine that this whole thing just shrivels up. But sure enough, it does. It separates from its corm and redevelops another leaf or flower right thereafter. But not all of them are giant. There's also a lot of really awesome small species, such as Claudelii, terrestris, and Polyanthus, just to name a few. There's also Natolii, and here is Alan holding Onxukelii in front of titanum. Just gives a really good example of how diverse in size these are. This is Onxukelii in front of Peter Grande at Plantulites in 2018. Some have green leaflets. I once overheard someone say, "But all the leaves look the same." Well, not true. Only some have green leaflets, but not all of them. Here's just an array of some of the awesome foliage colors, pattern sheens on some of the species. They also have colorful petioles to add to it. Many of the craziest colored petioles below these really cool foliage patterns. And then there's the fruit. The fruit structures are a work of art in themselves, ranging in various colors. Some even have a hot pink color ripening to a metallic blue, shown here with Amorphophallus cusianus. Most people only know of a few species, though. It wasn't long until Alan quickly educated me that there was well over 200 species, most of them growing right in his own collection in his yard. With a diversity of species covering a wide range of habitats, as you saw from the map, you can imagine that some are more temperate perennials, as we would assume in a normal perennial in our garden. Hardy to zone 6, Amorphophallus konjac, and then you have these very tropical species which don't follow our typical perennial schedule that a normal perennial would follow here, such as Amorphophallus titanum. Amorphophallus are even a food crop in Southeast Asia, known as the elephant-foot yam, which covers a couple of the species commonly grown in Southeast Asia. It's even used as a dietary supplement, shown here in this lipozine supplement. And I'm going to pass it back over to Jason.
All right, thank you, Brandon. That was great. So while most people, most horticulturists kind of, their imaginations are captured by this idea of growing these monster tropical plants, few people are afforded the opportunity to do them just for not having the facilities and the space to do it. So in 2019, I was working on a postdoc at the National Arboretum. I heard about this unique opportunity to build a brand new multi-million-dollar conservatory down in High Point University of all places. So with dreams of tropical plants in my head, I took a leap of faith and came down and interviewed. And I started in 2019 just as construction was underway. And here's what I walked into on my first day. And this project was part of this larger kind of multi-million-dollar project to build a brand new school called the Wannock School of Natural Sciences. So this building to the right had just been finished up right before I got there, actually during the time I got there. But it's a brand new science building with state-of-the-art labs, as well as a full dome planetarium as well inside of there, which is really, really cool. And so this was a really special addition to the university. And I already have plans for our first big Titan Arum bloom to take our hemispheric camera and try to record it and maybe get it up on the dome of the planetarium or do some fun stuff like that. So just some of the basic stats on the building. It's about a 15,000 square foot building, and right behind this building is a brand new cafe classroom as well as a small head house for us to be able to get some of our work done. But we have about 10 beds. We have a waterfall and aquatic pool. We have two 20-foot green walls, two 50-foot greenhouses on the sides of this space. So it's quite a large space. And so far, one staff, just me. It's a one-man show at this point. So while I was sitting there thinking about, what kind of collections I wanted to build in this space, my mind wandered back to my time at the Eden Project with that massive collection of tropical plants. But of course, the first thing I thought about was the Titan Arum that I saw in the offsite greenhouse. And this just so happened to coincide with all of the news and buzz around this plant lupin blooming at NC State. So I reached out to the intrepid grower of lupin, who happened to be Brandon, and met him on Hillsborough Street for lunch. We probably talked about Amorphophallus for an hour, and he brought me down to show me this picture on the left here was one of his other Titan Arums, I believe. And then later on, I came back and saw the his lupin in bloom there, well over 6 feet tall. So, I thought I had met the man, and he's still the man. But during that time, he actually told me about a guy right down the road, Alan Galloway, who had like one of the largest collections in the world and was really the true Titan of this group. So with that in mind, we had made plans to go out and meet Alan and kind of network with him a little bit and see if I could get a small collection of his plants from him to display in our new conservatory. But before that, we're gonna kick it back to Brandon and tell him about the first time that he met Alan.
Thanks, Jason. So in 2016, Alan reached out to me by email. I think Tony Avent connected me to him, and I knew of him at the time and his contributions to Amorphophallus, but for some reason I didn't know he lived right down the road, pretty much right here in Raleigh, and also worked at NC State in IT. I wouldn't have imagined. After exchanging emails a few times with him, he told me before I even knew that that lupin was developing a flower bud. I assumed it was just another leaf petiole at the time, but he knew just by the shape of it that it was a flower. So that just goes to show you how knowledgeable he was about the species. So I took his word for him, and Alan would stop in occasionally and check on the plant, though I wouldn't meet him until the flower. He would stop down in the greenhouse often, though, I heard, to check on it. Sure enough, a month later, the flower happened. Alan continued to visit the bloom, especially very early, before the crowds and even sometimes myself got there. Though I eventually ran into him in the conservatory, he generally avoided the crowds and would come and go and not really make himself known. He sent me a message the first morning of the flowering. He said, "Hey, if you want seeds, I heard you want to pollinate it. You better do that as soon as possible because you're missing your window." And so sure enough, I took his word for it, and I went ahead and pollinated it. So there I am pollinating it later on that day, and cut a small hole in the side there to access it. And sure enough, after a couple months, I started to develop fruit on the plant, and which eventually failed as seeds, but due to other things. But anyways, he was very accurate and knew exactly what was going on with the plant. A little later, a few weeks went by, and after all the excitement quieted down with the bloom, I went to go visit Alan. And what an amazing treat that was. Here, hundreds of plants grown to perfection. It was approaching late fall at the time, and many species were going dormant. So out on his greenhouse bench is all these tubers meticulously laid out on the bench with tags and just clever structures in his greenhouse to accommodate various species with different forms and heights and tuber sizes and shapes. One thing that was always fascinating to me was these really long tuber species, which he had these tree pots where these containers were 4 inches wide and sometimes 18 inches tall. He even used PVC pipes to grow some of them because the tubers were so long, like a carrot, that they needed these long containers to grow in. I visited Alan's place numerous times during the remaining years of his life, and no matter when I visited, there was always something new to see, something in flower, and something that I never noticed before about the genera to keep bringing you back for more and more. It's never a dull moment. He also had a lot of other oddities around the garden and yard, such as this Arisaema. And then beyond the aroids, in his gardens, he'd always have, bizarre plants, such as this really cool ornamental cotton, very variegated cotton. In one of the earliest exchanges, emails with Alan, he sent me a link to his website. So I go ahead and click through this page. Initially, looking at the site, it looks pretty simple, but inside is jam-packed with information and just loaded information and content about all the species all in one place. Lists of pretty much all the species known, but not only just the species listed. You can click on each link and find photos of the plants, the location, the native range, photos of the tubers, etc. Here you can see, here's Amorphophallus Galloway in particular. You can see the detail put into each page where you have photos of seedling stage and the tuber shape and size and petiole colors and leaflet arrangement, leaflet colors and flowers, and you name it, it's all there. You really can't see this kind of information anywhere else about Amorphophallus. I'd like to highlight Amorphophallus Galloway, which was named for Alan. Though Alan discovered many species, he was very humble and never really tried to name anything after himself. This one was named for him, and it was well deserved because it's probably one of my favorites, just because of its glossy purple sheen of its leaf, and has so many ornamental qualities, including this small pink flower. And the plant habit is pretty relatively small, can mature in quite a small container. I mentioned he had lots of discoveries, because he did, probably 30 or more, mostly Amorphophallus, but not limited to. You can see here that many of these are quite recent. There's a number on this list from 2019 alone, but a lot of them are in the 2010s. And it's amazing that, a plant genera today is there's still so many species that are being discovered and described. Right before he passed away, he was working on a publication on this new Amorphophallus key for the Philippines, and that it published shortly thereafter his death. But you could tell he was working hard to the end, just trying to get some of this information out there. One non-Amorphophallus that I would highlight that him and Petra Schmidt found in Thailand was this mutant Colocasia gigantea, later named Thailand giant. I recall him telling me a story about finding this plant not far from the road. Even if you don't grow Amorphophallus, you probably have grown this plant before. So it's quite a popular plant, well known, extremely vigorous, much more than the straight species Colocasia gigantea, which can grow if well fed from a 4-inch pot to a plant you can stand underneath in one season. In 2018, Plant Delight's nursery had their bloom, Peter Grande, Amorphophallus titanum. So of course I had to drop by and check it out. There, Alan was hanging out there with it, actively pollinating it and showing others the process. Here's a rare photo of Alan and I in this photo here. I asked if he would take a photo with me, and he said, sure. I learned later that he usually doesn't like to take photos with people or just himself at all. So I felt pretty honored later on. Alan had a memorial service held at Plant Delight's nursery. It was a really nice tribute with many of his works shown on display among his family and botanical friends from all over. Alan would be proud to see, a mixed bouquet with Amorphophallus petiole shown in the center. Though Alan's life was ended quite suddenly, his contributions live on. So many unidentified species, and likely more out there yet to be discovered. Here you can see on his website alone, there's a list of undescribed, unidentified species that are just numbers right now. So, this work will live on through his contributions and all those who he inspired. With that, I'm going to kick it back to Jason.
Okay, thank you, Brendan. That was great. Okay, so for me, meeting Alan Galloway was a pretty amazing experience. I got to meet Alan on a trip out there with Brandon in 2019. to kind of pitch him the idea of taking back some of his collection with us to display at HPU. And he spent hours with us that day. It was really incredible. I remember sitting in his house chatting with him about the new conservatory and about Amorphophallus and some of the care requirements that they have. And you just can't help but look around his walls and see pictures from collecting trips all over the world, and these pictures of plant descriptions that he's put together or new species that he's named. So I really got the sense I was kind of in the presence of like horticultural greatness here. And even though he was obviously in poor health, he spent hours walking through his collection, showing us all sorts of cool stuff. And as as Brandon said, he didn't like pictures taken of him, but I knew we wouldn't have much time with him, and I did snap a picture of him kind of showing Brandon some of the material here in his greenhouse. And I'm really happy that I did, because that just gives you a sense of like, the amount of energy and vigor he still had at the end there to show off and talk about his plants with a couple of young whippersnappers trying to get into the Amorphophallus game. And most of his collection was housed in this amazing kind of structure that he had out right behind his house, which just blew my mind. So he had an outdoor shade house here you can see on the left, and then behind this big rice paper plant, you can see that he had a greenhouse for some of the more deep tropical species. And again, under the shade house, it's Amorphophallus heaven. Like Brandon said, the plants were just grown to perfection and looking great. I don't know how he had the energy to keep up with all of these. After caring for a lot of these the last year myself, it's a lot of work. And I was completely stunned by the amount of variation in leaf texture, and even some of the colors from these little chartreuse margins you have on some of them. Leaf petioles that were just green or multiple different spotty colors, or even piano black like this Amorphophallus ochralucus here down in the bottom right corner. So again, I had only heard about Titanium and Konjac and a handful of the other ones, and I just couldn't believe the diversity of the species that he had collected in his collection. We also got to get a sense of his accessioning system, which as a plant breeder gave me very much anxiety. And I even talked to Alan about, what happens if I leave the door open, or if I bump into one of these benches with the tags just laying there. And he just turned completely deadpan to me and he just said, "You're dead." So that gives you a sense of his sense of humor, that he was on full display on that day with us. So he was really holding court, and it was really great to be out there with him. That day, he also sent me home with my very first decent-sized Titan Arum, as you can see here on the left. I just took it back in the back seat of my car, so I'm joining the Brandon in the club of shifting plants around in your sedan. Luckily, it didn't have a stinky bloom on it at this point, but so this is the first one we took back to HPU that day after our first meeting, and it also coincided with some seeds that I had just successfully germinated from the bloom on the plant at Dartmouth. Actually, they had a bloom a few months prior, and I had gotten those to germinate. So we already, even before taking on some of Alan's larger collection, we already had a pretty good little collection going of Amorphophallus that we were growing in our offsite nursery. I remember when I was talking to Alan, I just told him I just wanted to take a handful of plants to kind of start experimenting with, and kind of wait to take them when they were dormant. And he just literally was just shaking his head no the whole time. And he just kind of half joking, half not, he said, "It's all or nothing." So he was only half kidding. He wanted me to get those plants out of there now, and he wanted me to take as many as I could. So I ended up taking like 4 truckloads of plants over the course of the summer and the fall in 2019 back to High Point University. And every time I thought I was done, he'd say, "Come back and get more plants." So I did. And here you can see, thankfully, John Rothling, who was at High Point before my time, he had built, with some grant money, built this little offsite greenhouse, which we cleaned up and kind of turned into a little Amorphophallus dormancy house, waiting for these things to go dormant so we could clean them up and inventory them and start them on their dormancy period. So I'm happy to say that most of them survived, but this was a real crash course lesson on how wet to keep the pots on the wet dormant ones. And, do you store the dry dormant ones dry in their pots, or do you put them in a cold chamber? So luckily, Alan had given me so many plants that I was able to kind of do a little quick and dirty experiment with some extra reps, where I had bulbs stored in their pots, out of their pots, in the greenhouse out here at the offsite area, some in a cooler on campus. I had so many bulbs. I had bulbs everywhere. And so you can see here on the left is one of the cleaned up bulbs. So basically we just kind of rinse it off, get it real clean. And you can kind of see the growing point that's going to be coming on the following growing cycle. And like I said, we had bulbs stored everywhere. I even had some of the bulbs stored in a cool part of our cadaver lab at the basement of our science building, which seems kind of appropriate for corpse flowers. But the place I found that the majority of plants, both the dry and wet dormant type did the best in was in this chamber here to your right. This is actually a Marmot dormancy chamber for our Marmot researcher. And our Marmot researcher at HPU got moved up to the dean of the new Wannick school. So Marmots were not coming in here anytime soon. And I still hope that they're not, because I plan on using it in the future. But I'm able to control the temperature and relative humidity in here. And I talked to Alan and he said 55 temperature, 65 relative humidity was a good cross section for a lot of things. So almost everything except for the very, very small things and some of the very thin long tuber forms that kind of desiccated in here a little bit. But most things, especially the larger material, did just fine. And then they kind of busted out of dormancy with no problem. And that's where all of the material is that's been going dormant this year. I'm putting it all in this storage chamber. So as the plants were going dormant, I was starting to bring up plants from my contract grow for the conservatory. We had just finished major construction. And as you can see here, I didn't go small with my palm trees. We didn't have a large loading dock or access door or anything like that. So we had a good team of landscapers who managed to finagle these huge plants in through these public access doors in the back of this breezeway here. And a few things I couldn't fit through there. I just went too big. But for the most part, we were able to bring in some really nice big palm trees and really nice understory plants as well. And the day after this picture was taken, the entire state shut down. And so, I was the one essential worker kind of taking care of all these, and it's kind of been that way for the most part ever since. So it's a large amount of plants that we're maintaining. And on top of that, we have Alan's collection that was starting to come out of dormancy in the spring. And so here's a look at what one of the Amorphophallus that's starting to produce some growth and is kind of showing us that it wants to be potted up in the springtime looks like. And so it's, you don't see a huge change, at least I didn't, in the resting bud. You see it start to swell a little bit, but the real telltale sign that we saw on them was, and this was after chatting with Brandon too. I've pestered him quite a lot during this process. So here you can see these white new roots coming off of that new growing point. And the place you want to usually plant these is with that growing point right kind of smack dab in the center of the pot, and it'll build the new bulb underneath that. Alan and Brandon also told me these things like to be underpotted quite a bit. So on the right, you can see what is basically Alan's soil mix, which is a simple 1-to-1-to-1 bag mix, bark, and perlite. So very loose draining. And usually the pot was about twice the width of the bulb with the corm sitting right dead center. So that was kind of how I potted up everything over the last year, and everything seems to have done really well with that soil mix and that type of potting. And so this was one of and most of the things that came up early on ended up being flowers. So I'm not good enough yet to tell the difference between a flower coming up and a leaf. So some of these Deca Sylvie hybrids, which I have a lot of Alan's hybrids, are with Deca Sylvie, and they make these big, beautiful flowers. And even though there was, the campus was shut down, there was only essential workers around, I decided to go ahead and put some of these on display anyway, even though it was basically just me every day getting to enjoy them by myself. Here you can see the size of this flower as it was coming up and emerging. And I actually took some fun time lapse of some of these Amorphophallus as they were coming up too. We're kind of getting our time lapse system perfected, and I'll show that in a little bit. So I wanted to show some of the other plants that Alan gave us as he was giving us plants. So he also gave us a nice little collection of Typhonium, and Typhoniums, for us, they were okay. They were kind of spider mite magnets. So I don't know if I will try them in the conservatory again, unless it's I can crank the humidity a little bit higher than I had it last year. But here on the left, you can see Trilobatum, which was a huge flower, and I actually put this one on display. It was pretty special plant. So this is the giant form, And then Typhonium circinatum and some of the hybrids with it here on the right had this amazing silver kind of heart-shaped leaf, which I thought was really special. And we put these out on display too. Some of the other plants that were interesting were the Takaram. So he gave me a handful of these Takarams. These are New World aroids that I have a lot of my beds kind of geographically arranged. I didn't have, Amorphophallus in my New World tropics bed, but I was able to bring in these Takarams to kind of add a nice little aroid pop in our New World tropics bed. So Takaramingi was one of the earliest plants I had that actually woke up in the spring, and here it is on the left. You can see it kind of looks like a dragon egg from Game of Thrones or something. It's pretty wicked looking, but it unfurls these beautiful kind of umbrella shaped leaves. And then down at the base of the leaves, you can also see it produces a flower right along with those leaves. And it's a really interesting, weird textured aroid flower. So really, really cool plant. He also gave us some of the tropical Arisaemas he has, and here's one of the Arisaema nonganits from Thailand with its kind of branched spadix and kind of yellow, beautiful soft colored spathe. And what we noticed when we were doing time lapse with a lot of the aroids that he gave us is that they go through a lot of nutation, it's called, where they like to kind of move around and dance when they have just a single source of light above them. And maybe this will play for you guys, but we did it with this Arisaema here. This is about, you can see it wobbling around. So this was a really fun one. I had no idea that Arisaemas or a lot of the aroids were just out there dancing this much in the understory, probably looking for light through the canopy and the understory. But this one moved pretty quickly. So this was about 2 minutes. Like this was a photo every 2 minutes. And then, this is just normal speed at that 2 minutes per photo cycle. So you can see, I think it'll open up here. I'll wait and let it open up. There it goes. So that was pretty fun. I'm just trying to take some time lapse for our future horticulture classes and some of our botany classes to provide some material for them. For teaching purposes. So there it goes. Thanks for humoring me. I love that. So a few of the other plants from Alan's collection, you'll notice that hybrid castor bean that was at the end of his driveway here. We actually brought that into the conservatory, and then he also gave us a Hedychium Hasseltii from Java. This is it really adds a nice fragrance to one of our corner beds, and it's kind of one of these weird semi-epiphytic ginger lilies, and it's been doing really well in the conservatory. And now for the last few slides, I want to show you how we used some of his Amorphophallus in our conservatory bed. So one of my favorite plants that I was able to use quite a bit through the beds was hybrids with Amorphophallus taurostigma white veins. And so he had a lot of hybrids, well, not a lot, a handful of hybrids that he gave us with this that exhibited this beautiful, striking variegation down the leaf. And, using this in the kind of dark understory in some of my beds, I thought it was a really nice, bright pop of a white. And here you can see it's kind of blending really well with our sealing wax palm, a beautiful rare palm with this red crown shaft, Cyrtostachys rhinda. Here's a little Amorphophallus onxucalii with its kind of like soft yellow spathe on that. And I put it next to one of our kind of workhorse foliage plants, the Schefflera Trinet, to kind of help bring out a little bit of the yellows. And this was one that, once the students were back, a lot of students would stop by and kind of give it a little awe and kind of look at it and ask about it. So it was fun just to have up on the lip of this garden bed when it was producing a bloom. And it bloomed a couple of times during its first year, so we were able to pull it out of the greenhouse and put it on display several times. Some of the Amorphophallus we had looked best when they were kind of emerging. So I would put plants in our beds when they were just emerging. So here I have a bed with like Southeast Asia, Northern Australia kind of zone plant. So I put this Amorphophallus camoensis when it was just emerging. And this was one that Alan had labeled pattern petiole. And you can see how heavy the patterning is on the petioles that are emerging. But one of the reasons I loved it so much is because it's got this bright pink spotty leaf sheath or stipule or bract, or I'm not sure botanically what that would be, but it's the sheath of the emerging leaf has so much color in it. And it looked pretty fantastic. And here you can see it nested in the bed amongst the awesome bat flowers, which I use a lot of bat flowers. I love those. And some of the, another workhorse plant, the African mask alocasia. And here you can see I had a handful of his African species, and so we had a bed that was dedicated to African taxa and islands surrounding Africa, like Madagascar. So here's a Amorphophallus impressus from Tanzania and Malawi. And what I liked about this one is it has this like glaucous kind of waxy bloom on the petiole, which kind of made it change colors from anywhere from like a kind of a purple to like a soft pink kind of color. And here I have it nested beside a big bottle palm, big Hyophorbe bottle palm, and kind of nested down amongst a group of the graffiti pink and graffiti white pentas, as well as the variegated stars and stripes. And I also put this picture of African gold Zandadeshi in here. I got this one from Alan too, and here's what it looked like on the left coming from his place. And he told me when I took it that, you know, to get this like nice striped leaf, you have to have it, you know, in pretty bright sun. And he was kind of doubting that under the roof of a conservatory or in any sort of under any sort of canopy that you would actually get any of that color. And he was damn right, because if you look at the bottom right corner here, here's the same plant with absolutely no stripes in it. So that one's going to get moved in front of a bright window after when I'm ready to do it. So coming into the fall, the students are back. I'm basically drowning in Amorphophallus at this point. They're everywhere. They're getting so big that they're, you know, wanting to fall off of benches unless I have them tied up 10 different ways. And if you've ever seen what happens when students in backpacks do when they go through a tight greenhouse space, backpacks are kind of the bane of horticulture people at universities, because they'll make a turn and a plant will go flying off of a bench because they forget that they have this backpack on. So at some point I just decided, you know what, I'm just going to take every damn Amorphophallus I have and just drop it in every spot I had. So here in this corner bed and along the back wall here, you can see I've put tons of Amorphophallus back here, kind of anchored by this large Amorphophallus tonkinensis in the corner. And then another fun thing is, just because there wasn't much color from flowers back here, I decided to hang some of these Stanhopea orchids that were starting to bloom from the knobs on this pygmy date palm that I had in this back bed, and actually worked really well to hang these plants from without adding any extra structures to the bed. So it added a little pop of color to that corner as well. So this was pretty fun, just getting everything in display. And so these have slowly been going dormant now, and I've been getting them prepped for dormancy as they've been going down. But this is what it's really all about for me. So this is an example of some of the students coming through, and you'll see down here in the bottom left, we have these little yellow labels that we'll put down with numbers on them. These are associated with classes in our new Wannock School of Natural Sciences. So a lot of our environmental sciences classes, botany classes, we will use the conservatory for kind of laboratory assignments. So, you know, for instance, there was one assignment just looking at pollinator flower interactions, and we had a label on kind of wind pollinated plants like our papyrus over in our pool, and some on some of our orchids, some on a stinky flower of Amorphophallus, and their job was to try to imagine what kind of pollinators actually pollinate that plant, or how the plant is pollinated. So it gets people thinking about plants in a different way, and hopefully it's kind of sparking the interest of the next generation of plant geeks out there in the industry. And I will say that we actually had a few students who volunteered with us, and one of my best students is actually and he's in the top 3 out of 60 something people that applied for a job at New York Botanic Gardens, and he's in the running in the top 3 to get a job working with them. So I'm hoping that this will be this building will be a source of internships and volunteer opportunities for our students to be able to go on into the industry as well. So what are the next step for us? Well, I've just been doing almost nothing but cleaning bulbs in my free time when I'm not working in the conservatory. I've just been cleaning, organizing, accessioning. And I've also, because we have so many extra reps of everything, and because we're kind of limited on space, and we want to have some plants besides Amorphophallus in our production houses, that we're trying to scale down to just, you know, a handful of the plants that we want to maintain and put on display. And so we've been reaching out to other gardens, some in North Carolina. For instance, John Rothling over at Reynolda Gardens took a nice collection of Amorphophallus to put on display for people to enjoy there. I've talked to the new horticulture administrator over at the North Carolina Zoo, so I'm hoping to get some of his plants on display in the apiary and tropical Conservatory over there as well. And just last week, I heard back from Ryan Olson up at Lewis Ginter Botanic Gardens, and they're very, very interested in getting some of his material to put on display in their conservatory as well. So right now we're trying to pare down our collection to just the plants that we want to put on display, try to get rid of some of the extra reps we have. We have a lot of reps of a lot of the things that he gave us. So we're trying to kind of pare down and get to a core collection that we can maintain throughout the year, and also get some of his stuff on display at other gardens. So people all over the country and all over North Carolina can enjoy some of his plants in public gardens a little bit more. So with that, I put my email at the bottom down here too. I will make a shameless plug that if you're in the Triad area and you're looking for a great place to volunteer, we'll definitely put you to work. We have a lot of work to do in this new conservatory, and we've still yet to have our big grand opening yet. So that'll be coming hopefully as soon as all this COVID stuff is behind us. But we're happily taking people from the community and bringing them in. And if you know anybody that lives in the Triad that would be interested in doing some work in a conservatory, we would happily take any volunteers at this point. So with that, I think we can open it up for questions for Brandon and I, and thank you for your attention. Oh, hey, Dan, how are you?
Doing well.
Good.
I was like, hey, you guys didn't talk much about, there were a few blackouts, but about propagation and leaf propagation.
Yeah, we didn't talk much about leaf propagation, but that is something we've actually been able to propagate some of his strange kind of long tuber forms that, whenever I would accidentally break off a leaf moving a plant, I would stick it down in a bucket of water, and damn if they didn't produce like new little bulbs right on the bottom of them. Some of them did, some of them didn't. But I know, I'll let Brandon talk. I know he's done a lot of leaf propagation on Titanium, and he was been very successful with that. So you want to discuss that, Brandon?
Yeah, sure. Hey, Dan.
Hey.
Yeah, so Amorphophallus are pretty weird in that they do propagate from leaf cuttings. What I found is it works best if you have one of the forks in the leaflets. So, you actually you need that junction where the leaflets branch off. They branch off multiple times, but you kind of need that little rachis. The leaf itself kind of just withers away. But Titanium takes many months to get it into a tuber. They're strange. They'll form a callus, and then after a while, they'll sit as a callus for a while. I usually stick them under mist for like the first month or so, and then they'll start a callus, and then they'll root out, and then they'll eventually develop a small tuber. What's really weird about Titanium is that Titanium is very solitary in its growth from seed. It does not pop often, but when you propagate it clonally, I have one leaf cutting generated 7 bulbs, and
nice.
These 7 bulbs continue to pup a year away from being potted up on their own plant. So they kind of like, there's some sort of weird hormonal thing going on, but the tropical species tend to be easier to propagate. Like some of these longer season types.
Dan, do you have any of the temperate types in your garden in Oregon there, just out of curiosity?
Just konjac, that's it. But I just came back from a trip to Thailand last year, and oh my God, for about $1 a piece, you can get probably a dozen different species of Amorphophallus. And
wow.
So I brought back a small collection from there. So
nice.
We'll have to compare notes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you guys use any hormones on the leaf cuttings, or just drop them in?
I have in some cases, and I have not in other cases, and I really haven't noticed much difference. So I'm still kind of tweaking that propagation. They're very strange. I think when I first did it, I left them under mist too long. You kind of have to get them to callus, and then you kind of have to get them away from the mist to kind of force them to kind of grow. It's kind of this balance, they're very weird.
Okay.
Yeah, and I can say some of those smaller tropical long tuber forms that I had that broke just trying to move them, I just literally threw them in a bucket of water I had in the corner and forgot about them. I came back months later and pulled them up, and I'm like, there's a big tuber on the bottom of it, which I was shocked by. So some of them are real easy, don't require much of anything, just a bucket of water and forget about it for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm sure there's others with questions, but one more.
Okay.
Are there any aquatic Amorphophallus?
Good question.
Ooh,
Well, thank
stump the guy.
I can't say I know of any, unless they're out there still somewhere.
Okay.
I mean, I feel like I've seen pictures of them from Alan's travels where some are growing kind of in crevices and rocks and stuff near like running water or standing water, but I don't know if I mean, they may just be marginal. I've thought about trying some of the more deep tropical ones, like in between the rocks in our waterfall and pool that we have in the conservatory, just to see if they would kind of reach down in there and get water and just kind of survive like that. But I haven't pulled the trigger on that yet.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
I know Tony probably has a lot of experience with leaf propagation as well.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
actually published a paper several years ago that you can find online. I think we detailed something like 80 species, and we did a 5-year rooting project. So you can pull that up and see the percentages and timing and that stuff.
hey, Tony.
Hey, Mr. Dan. While I'm got the floor, I will just mention that Alan's garden and house will be going on the market probably this spring. It's been a lot of time going through the gardens and making sure that we got anything that had research value. There is still a ton of plants there. The house is pretty amazing, although Alan did not spend a lot of time in the house. His relatives that inherited it have really gone in and done a lot of work. For those that visit Alan, I mean, Alan, furniture was not an issue for him. Furniture, he had no dishes. His life was outside and in that greenhouse. So the house obviously comes with that amazing greenhouse that you showed and sage shade structure. So it would be lovely if we could find a plant person to purchase that. So if you do have any interest in that, let me know and I'll hook you up with the family, because it would be a shame to see that go to somebody who doesn't realize what's there and would just tear down that greenhouse structure.
Good plan.
Yeah, and I will say that all of the trips, like I told you, I went out there 4 box truck loads and then going out to get bagged dormant tube corms. And then I was out there a lot with him in those last days. And just, you know, every time I went out there, it's not like he was like, okay, I'll be in the house, let me know if you need anything. He was out there, you know, moving plants with me, carrying. I kept saying, no, I'll get it. And he just loved drinking his, you know, having a cigarette and drinking his, you know, mellow yellow or whatever he was drinking out there. And my brother lives like 5 minutes down the road from him, and he runs a wedding cake business. And I would always bring him a piece of wedding cake, and he was like, don't tell anybody, I'm not supposed to have this. So he was, I mean, like, I wish I had known him longer. He was a real character. I really enjoyed the time I got to spend with him there at the very end. And I'm sure there's many of you who know him way better than I do. But anyway, I just think it was really good that he gave some of his plants to some of the local nurseries, or not nurseries, but the local conservatories around. And, you know, part of the reason I wanted to take so much of his materials, that I told him I would try to get it into hands of other gardens just to get it on display, because I would love for his material to get on display as many places as possible. And yeah, so that's why we took on so much of his collection.
Very cool.
We have a stash at NC State as well, and I have in my own plant nerd collection as well. So they're well distributed, and many other conservatories across the country.
Yeah, we're hoping Brandon gets a job where he can still work with them, and I can send him a bunch of the plants back.
Well, either way, a hobby greenhouse is maybe a necessary thing.
Well, there's a house available with one if you're in the area.
Just give it to him.
Let's start a GoFundMe. Anyway. But yeah, I do want to say a special thanks to Brandon. I mean, like, without Alan was like my main source of information on trying to just jump into this large group of plants right away. But Brandon was a huge amount of help as well, communicating with me and kind of telling me all of what he knew about growing and maintaining these. I was not 12 years old growing konjac like he was, so thanks Brandon for all your help the last year.
Of course. Yeah, I'm glad that it the timing was kind of strange because Jason reached out to me at a time when Alan was first diagnosed, and it was kind of a strange pivotal point because I remember emailing Alan and saying, hey, I'd like you to meet Jason. He's building this they got this conservatory, we can expand this collection. And he's like, he writes back all in one message. He says, that sounds great. And he's like, I was just, he tells me about his diagnosis, and it was kind of this like really crazy email. But it was kind of like, this is great because my plants can go live on here and, and be dispersed. So it was just kind of a strange timing, but yeah.
And as many of you know, he only communicated through Facebook Messenger, and I was confused when I first saw his message because he was like, great talk, I really enjoyed it. And then it was just talking about Amorphophallus the rest of the time. And I just now, I don't know why I didn't realize this until now, but I went back just to try to see some information in our text stream. And I noticed that text was from like 2012, back when I was at NC State. And I think he had come to one of my talks at the J.C. Ralston Friends of the Arboretum lecture when I was geeking out on E.H. Wilson, and gave a talk way back in the day on that. So, I technically, I guess I must have met him after my talk on that. But anyway, I didn't remember that until just this past week. I saw that in my messenger chain. So anyway.
There was actually a couple questions from the chat. Someone earlier wondered if there were any that Amorphophallus you would recommend as houseplants.
Yeah, there's a couple. I would say a lot of these like miniature species are great. Konjac's pretty good as a starter if you haven't grown it already. Can easily be grown in a container. It's dormant in the winter, so you just store the tuber dry. You could just pull the tuber up and put it in a dry storage for the winter. And so there's a lot of these temperate species which you can grow easily as a garden plant just in a container on your porch. And there's also many of the little ones. Like actually, I was going to show you guys. This is Polyanthus. This is actually blooming. Well, it's about to open. This little flower. But you can see this is a mature plant growing in a 4-inch pot. A great little house. It could be a great little house plant. It's not taking up much room. I put it out in the summer when it's in vegetative stage, and it just stores dry in the winter. So I would say there's a lot. I would stay away from some of the giant tropical ones unless you have a greenhouse, because they get very large and they have very long growing seasons, and they don't like to be, these leaves don't, the petioles don't like to be moved around when they're in leaf stage. It's not good to change your environment up. They'll go dormant right away, and then you'll kill your bulb development for that season. So I would say there's a lot. They make great. I wouldn't want to count how many species I have here in my apartment, and they're all dormant. A lot of them are dormant right now, so yeah, they're very accommodating.
Yeah, Alan took my inventory list and I sent it back to him because I didn't know which species were dry dormant, wet dormant, all of that stuff. So I would second what Brandon says. If you can find some of the more temperate ones that you can just dry store the bulbs, like in a garage or just somewhere dark and cool that's not going to get completely freezing, but it's not like a heated space. And I think I was talking to Brandon about like how cold would it get in a garage before it really harmed him. And I think you were able to get some, like leave some in your garage or your little storage shed in your apartment out there when it got pretty darn cold, and it didn't hurt him at all, the species you were working with.
Right. Yeah, a lot of them can, as long as they don't freeze. And a lot of these, it just dry, as long as they don't freeze, they're fine.
Great, wonderful answer. Couple more. Any chance you might provide your emails in the chat, because I think people missed your email.
Yeah.
If you can do that, that'd be great.
Yep, I dropped mine in there.
Okay.
.edu.
All right, here's one from out of left field. I'm not sure what the response would be. Any chance someone can rescue and dig up leftover plants at Alan's house and sell them at the Arboretum.
We've done a lot of rescues. We've been rescuing since last May, but we really wanted to leave the garden intact for hoping the right person would come in and buy it. So anything that was just irreplaceable has been rescued or pieces off of them.
Okay,
And the Arboretum has been out there as well. So yes, they've made
great.
There's a lot of plants still there.
Can Amorphophallus grow in the ground year round in zone 9A?
Yeah, there's a number of species. Yeah, zone 9 is pretty warm. You know, Tony has a whole bunch of them. Alan had a whole bunch of them growing in their garden year round here in zone, I guess we're 7B, 8A. So definitely, I'd say, you know, there's probably, Tony, how many species would you say grow here?
Oh, wow. In the garden, I think we have 12 species, 12 to 15, because we're finding more each year that are winter hardy here.
Yeah. Yeah, and zone 9A is a whole zone bump warmer, so you probably could push a lot more.
Okay, another houseplant oriented question. Are any of the smaller species good as houseplants? And if so, are they available in the trade?
Yeah, they're great as houseplants. A lot of those, like Unsukelii, is you know, pretty much mature in a 4-inch pot, maybe 6-inch pot max. It clumps. It has these very small tubers. But I would say that, you know, as far as how commercially available they are becomes a challenge. A place like Plantholites may carry some of those here and there. But, you know, a lot of those smaller species that we showed in the talk were recently discovered. So they have yet to kind of reach a commercial level. But I imagine in the future that'll very much, these will be more popular and readily available. So I think that the commercially available component is the challenge right now.
Right.
So yeah, I do have a question about that. The species you mentioned, you said was Onsukelii. How do you spell that?
Let's see. It's ONG
Oh,
ONGSUK.
That right? I think I
oh yeah,
typed it in the
it's
chat.
very.
Angsu, and then it's E. What is it?
You, right?
What's that?
I
think
mean,
it's-
honestly, the leaves on this guy look kind of like that curry plant that Indian people cook with.
Oh.
Like that
It
curry.
has- The Unsukelii is kind of cool. It looks like, to me, it looks like a super miniature Titanium. It has these, it's kind of called sometimes the fern leaf Amorphophallus because it's got these like really delicate small little leaflets. It makes it look like a miniature version of Titanium.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Huh,
there's a lot of
wow, wait, Polyanthus, that's a really interesting flower as well. Like you have several clustered together.
Yeah, and it flowers right out of like, you know, it's flowering with the leaf up, you know, which some flower when they're kind of dormant, when they have no leaf, and in between leaves, and some flower with the leaf. So that one kind of flowers with the leaf and the flower. That was discovered in, I think, 2007 in Laos with Alan and a guy, Onsukelii. Yeah, Tony would know.
And up Angskul.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jerry, Christopher has just put the botanic name in the chat if you want to copy that.
Yeah, I saw it. Google is actually pretty good about auto-suggesting it once you get the ONG in.
Yeah.
Well, for me, and I know for Brandon too, Alan's website, and you know, I don't know what the history of that's going to be in the future, how that's going to be maintained. I'm guessing maybe is Tony like maintaining that website or keeping it active, or
yeah, actually, great point. We just signed the papers yesterday. We now own the site, and it will be permanently maintained.
Okay, it's like my main source of information still. So, and I've been thinking about it lately. Is like, is that going to go away at some point?
Like that Salvia website as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's
one
of our goals is try to preserve things like that.
Tony, if that house was purchased, it's right down the road from you. I know you have plans for your garden and everything like that. If that's something where like could that become part of PDN if the house was paid for?
Probably is too far away. I mean, just the maintenance would require somebody getting in a vehicle and going away. So we talked about that. That would be hard, just because it is such it was just designed with a very high level of maintenance. You would have to redesign it to lower the maintenance a good bit, because Alan designed it so that he would have to be out there every minute of every day.
Connected to that, we had a question. How much land would go with Alan's house?
It's just under an acre, 0.92.
Okay, awesome. Will Jason please pronounce his last name? Been incorrectly pronounced, apparently.
Well, it's a weird last name. So I'm from North Carolina, and North Carolina people say Lattier, and that's kind of what I go by when I'm here. When I was in the UK, or my family's originally from Louisiana, so it's always Lattier. And when I was in the UK, everybody just defaulted to Lattier, and it was fine. But I'm from North Carolina, so it's Lattier.
Awesome. Well, thank you for helping us with that.
I accept all pronunciations of it.
Okay.
I think it means the milkman in French or something like that. So you can tell where my family came from. Some amorous milkman back in the day.
Dairy people. Now here's a question that I'm not even sure exactly what they're talking about. Is the warty on the stem of Amorphophallus bulbovarti a seed?
That's it's actually a bulbil. They produce these really cool bulbils, which are little like bulb developments right in the leaf. So you can actually remove that and propagate it from there. There's a couple species that do that. They're pretty bizarre.
Yeah, if I was quicker, I could pull up a great picture. I had a really large plant nested in one of the corners of one of my beds that was making these really huge bulbils all over it, and it was a gorgeous plant. But yeah, those big warty bulbils on top are pretty fascinating. I had at least one big plant with that exhibiting that on display in the conservatory. So
yeah. I just want to point out that you can get several different varieties, and I don't mean to do a plug, but Tony has these great plants that I've gotten from him, and I've had outside in my garden here in Cary for several years now, and a couple of them have already bloomed, and I just really love them for their foliage. And if you're ever out at Plant Delights, you can see them in all their glory. They really add a lot to a garden, regardless of what your primary plant is.
Thanks. That's good to know. And of course, we're so lucky to live right down the road from Tony Avent. And
Alan had done a lot of hybridizing, and I know Jason mentioned a lot of the tropical stuff. We have most of the hardy hybrids, and they are on trial now and have been now for a couple of years. And so a lot of those will be hitting the market, probably still a few years off because it takes a while to evaluate and then build them up. But Alan's legacy is going to continue to enrich people's gardens for many, many years to come.
And we're trying to find a way to get some of those weirder tropical long tuber species on display. We've been working with a pottery guy out of Seagrove, North Carolina. I might try to get him to make some specialty containers that can provide enough airflow and be something a little more ornamental than a piece of PVC for maybe displaying some of those long tuber forms in the bed. Because Alan said that those types have never really been on display before. They're too finicky and you need a weird kind of pot and extra airflow for them. And so we've got some things, in the works as far as trying to find better ways to display some of the stranger species at our conservatory as well. So, but yeah,
Could
So
you
and I think everything we have is still, he's got material at other gardens. I made sure that nothing he gave us, I was like, don't give me something I'm going to kill and it's going to be the only representative in the world. So I feel pretty good that I don't have anything that's, if I lose, I'm going to regret it too bad, because I can always get some more. But yeah, we have a lot of material that we're trying to disperse right now of his material. So let's see. Cooked konjac. Has anybody ever eaten this stuff? Somebody says we cook the konjac.
Oh yeah, it's actually, you can use them in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
I've eaten the noodle form. I've eaten them as rice. I've turned them into the tofu form. It's actually kind of funny because the way that you form the noodles or the whatever else you're using them with is with you need calcium hydroxide. So I had a bunch of that on hand because I had to use the calcium hydroxide for something else. So I was able to make a lot of it, but it does not taste like anything, but it has a very like almost crunchy sort of texture.
I've had it twice, once in the US and once overseas, and it was the most disgusting food I've ever put in my mouth. It tasted like it smelled. Once one was pickled, and I can't remember how the other one was. So not something I can recommend unless you are starving.
I mean, in my parents' place, it was starvation food. Though it's ironically, though, the tubers are actually like have no nutrition. Like it's used as a diet supplement because the starch part of the tubers are basically completely like they're basically indigestible to humans. Also, the other thing about it is the smell that you're talking about, like that fish smell that you're talking about, Tony, that actually comes from the reaction of the calcium hydroxide with the Amorphophallus. It doesn't actually smell like that naturally.
It tasted like that.
Well, smell is a large part of it.
In the chat that said there was a restaurant in Ann Arbor that used konjac as a meat substitute many years ago.
People used it. I know I have some in the some like fish balls, which are like an Asian type of fish ball in the fridge that they used konjac as the base for that. So it is used. It is used quite a bit. Like I can use it to thicken sauces too, and it doesn't smell when you use it to thicken sauces because it will not it doesn't congeal, and what's causing it to congeal is yeah, the skinny noodles are konjac. It's just that you have to rinse them several times to get rid of the smell because they smell.
Yum.
Well, I'll throw something out there too. So while I have the Nards group right here, there is a, just for future reference, there's a big oval shaped garden bed right in front of the conservatory in a big exposed area surrounded by brick that's just full of boxwoods and pansies right now. But I think it's a perfect spot for doing some sort of like crevice garden, some sort of kind of hardy some sort of hardy succulents or other things like that. If anybody in the future would be interested in kind of doing a project at HPU, I know there's a lot of great rock gardeners and crevice gardeners and all that sort of thing in attendance today. Send me an email if we can raise the money for it. I just don't like there being a bed of boxwoods and pansies in front of the conservatory. I would love it to be a really cool garden. So keep that in mind in the future.
Thanks, Jason. You really gave me a great big opening to go through. First of all, we have Jeremy Schmidt, who I'm sure you know, at Tony's, is probably the crevice garden master on the East Coast at this point anyway. So he's definitely somebody you might want to get in touch with. And I just wanted to plug last weekend's Crevice Garden Conference. If you missed that study day, it's not too late. Bobby Ward told me you can go ahead and sign up and watch the video. And it was outstanding with Kenton Seth, Jeremy Schmidt, Paul Spriggs, all of whom are internationally known as crevice garden artists. And then a few other people who are more doing it at home and how they're doing it and making it work. So I just want to plug that. You can go through the NARG's website for that. And
Great.
be very exciting to have a crevice garden at High Point. That's awesome.
I know, and it's right in front of the conservatory. I think would be very, very cool there. So
Awesome.
anyway, we're fighting the good fight and trying to get some more of the beds around there that are kind of in the public areas to be more gardens. We add more gardens than we do staff at any one time, though. So we have to make sure we can maintain it and manage it as well. But I think there's a great opportunity for something right in front of the brick patio and in front of the conservatory. So, and we hope one day that we'll be back open to the public and for visitors, and maybe having conferences in the future there. We have a great, I would love to give some sort of conference or put together a talk on the full dome and the planetarium up at the new science building, and then go down to the conservatory down below. So, I have a very small crew of just me right now. So I have a lot of big plans for the future, but yeah, hopefully we'll get there. We just got to get through this weird year right now that we're in. And I got big plans for the place. So
the conservatory is currently closed to the public?
Yeah, the whole university, just for COVID restrictions. And we're unique. We've actually been able to hold our case numbers really well because it's really a closed campus there, because a place like UNC or Duke, or so many people live off campus and then come on campus all day long. You can't really control how the students interact, but most of our students live on campus, so we can control, what goes on campus and make sure everybody's following the correct protocol. So our case numbers have been pretty low, and we've been able to have students back in. We had students back in the fall, and now we have students back in now. But as far as having other people visit from off campus, that's kind of, we're starting to do that, but it's mostly contractors and workers and stuff that are working on the property. It's not really, guest scientists or lecturers and those sort of things. We're not to the point where we just want to fully open up to the public yet, just for safety concerns until we get people vaccinated and that sort of thing. So
I've yet to see the collection living over there yet, due to COVID.
Yeah, you'll be able to come as soon as they're all dormant and sitting back in the cooler.
Hey, sorry, Tony. So on your website, there's this Amorphophallus lacorii. Is that and it says it's 20 inches tall, so that would be a relatively medium-sized houseplant sort of thing, right?
Yeah,
or is it more okay?
Yeah, it's a smaller plant, not hardy, but amazing color.
Because it seems like one of those. What does the bloom look like? Because when I Googled it, there was no pictures.
It's a typical what we call pseudodracontium flower. It's just a little small white cup with white spadix.
Okay. I see.
Jerry, check Alan's site. There's a lot of links of different species and photos if you can't find it somewhere else. It's usually a good source. Sometimes it works better than Google.
Fair enough.
Which is hard to imagine.
Hey, Brandon, could you put that web address in the chat?
Oh yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would say that as I've been cleaning tons and tons of corms, there's a lot of them that produce offsets too. Some of them I put one corm in the pot, and then I finally took it out, a year later, and I've just got a pile of these things. So, there are some, if people would like to try them on their own, I could get some of those into the hands of people if they really wanted to try some, but some of them are just very vigorous and offsetting in the pot. So
which ones?
Say again?
Which ones?
Oh, shoot me an email. I can send you an inventory.
Okay.
I can't think of them off the top of my head right now.
Yeah,
but,
fair enough.
Yeah.
I have to go all the way up, right? The email, yeah.
They can be pretty prolific, a lot of the species. Here's one I just unpotted. This is Albus Bathus. Here's the parent, and here's you get these little bulbs, you get these little pups in the pot. These are great. It's a great plant to share with friends, because in conjects the same way. They're just very prolific.
Yeah. I've had a lot of that. If it was earlier in the season, it might have been fun to show some people some leaf cuttings, but They're all dormant now, so. Sorry, can you put your email in the chat again? I really can't see it.
I just put mine in there. Can you see it?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, so maybe Brandon, you can put yours in there.
As
There you
well.
go.
Alan's site is there in the chat as well.
Thank you.
Well, thank you everybody for spending your Saturday with us. This was fun. Sorry about my brief power outage. I'm happy that it happened during Brandon's section.
Well, thank you so much, Brandon and Jason. This has just been a wonderful presentation, and I'm so honored that you agreed to speak with us. And thanks, Tony, too, for filling in some other information about this wonderful genus. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks a bunch.
All right,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, guys. Great
Have a
presentation.
good day. See
Take
you.
care.
Bye, everybody.